In today's video, I'm going to continue my arrow building series, and today we're going to discuss nock types. We're going to discuss the differences in nock sizes, nock shapes, how they affect tune, and with that information, you'll learn how to pick the best nock for you to be able to shoot the tightest groups possible. For those of you that are new here, my name is Jake Kaminsky. I'm a two-time Olympic silver medalist in the sport of archery. I'm working to make this channel a great resource to all types of archery. So if you haven't yet, hit that subscription button and the notification bell. That way you're notified every time a new video is uploaded. I'd appreciate it. So there are a million different types of nocks out there. There are pin nocks, there are in nocks, there are out nocks, there are in-out nocks, there are biter nocks that are asymmetrical, there are symmetrical nocks, there's large groove, small groove, different colors, different lengths. There's all sorts of different things that are in nocks that you should be aware of, and each one of them do slightly different things. So in this video, I'm going to show you up close of all the different nocks, discuss with you my information and my knowledge that I have learned over the years from using and shooting different types of nocks, as well as talking to people who helped design nocks themselves. So that way you can learn some more information about nocks that you haven't yet, and you'll be able to pick the best nock for you or use your nocks that you have to your advantage. Alright, so here is a pretty good assortment of nocks. We have some Easton nocks, different types of pin nocks. We have biter nocks, we have gold tip nocks, and in here I have an assortment of used nocks, from pin nocks to biter nocks to biter nock caddies, biter pin nocks, biter in nocks, biter out nocks, biter pin out nocks. There's lots and lots of different options. So I'm going to do my best in this video to show you and explain to you the differences of the nocks themselves. So before we get too far into the nocks, the first main difference is going to be the difference between a pin nock and a regular out nock, or a regular in nock, or whatever type of nock it is. A pin nock just simply has a metal pin that helps center the nock and aligns the nock onto the shaft. So this metal pin, now you can use them on fatter arrows, skinnier arrows, it doesn't matter. This is an Easton X10. And as you can see, it's actually been hit already, so it's already done its job and protected this arrow shaft. Here are some Carbon Express Maxima Recurve RZs, and you can see I have a pin nock bushing adapter on this actual shaft. So it's a fatter arrow with the pin nock in it. So you can shoot them on all sorts of different types of arrows. I really like the pin nocks, and I use them in a lot of setups. So the main differences between a pin nock and a non-pin nock is that in general, a pin nock will stiffen the arrow compared to a non-pin nock, because the pin itself weighs a fair amount of weight, and when you add weight to the back half of an arrow, it stiffens it, and the opposite is true. If you added the weight to the front, made the point heavier, and make the arrow weaker. So keep that in mind when you're selecting nocks, is that it can affect the tune of your arrow and affect your performance then. All right, so now we're going to talk about the basic nocks themselves. So the regular nocks, the pin nocks, the Easton pin nocks, the gold tip pin nocks, the regular Easton 3D bushings, this is a Carbon Express nock. It's just a regular nock, the symmetrical nock. So what is the main differences found in a symmetrical nock? The main differences in a symmetrical nock are going to be summarized by this: a G nock or a regular nock. A regular nock has shorter ears compared to the G nock. So I'll take a G pin out so you can see, and I'll be able to compare it to a regular pin nock, and we'll be able to see the differences in between the two types of nocks. So this is a regular pin nock, and this is a G pin nock. So the main difference, there is no external structure difference or length difference or anything, but you can see the difference between this one, which is a regular pin nock, and a G pin nock, is the length of the ears. This portion that is going past the string is much longer on a G pin nock than a regular pin nock. Now, I don't like this for recurve shooters. I don't like the G pin nock for recurve shooters because the ears are so long. I believe that the arrow is going to be touching the string longer than this one, obviously. And so what happens is, as that arrow is decoupling and coming off the string is going to start oscillating left and right. And if it happens too far past brace height, like if you have too tight of a nocking point, or too tight of a nock fit, which if you haven't checked out the video yet about my nock fitment, I'll put a link in the description below, plus a card at the top here where you can see that. But what I believe will happen is if you have too tight of a nock fit and these long ears, the string's going to start oscillating before the nock is fully off the string, and it could affect your accuracy. So I always go with the regular pin nock when I'm shooting recurve archery. A lot of compound shooters will use these because they are large groove. G nocks are only available in large groove. So large groove are 98 thousandths of an inch inside diameter. Small groove are 88 thousandths of an inch inside diameter. Now, if you don't know what size nocks you are and you have these, like these Easton pin nocks, you just simply turn it over on the opposite side of the Easton logo and you'll see an S. That means small groove. L would mean large groove. Biters have, I believe it's 0 and 1 as the differences of the nock fitments themselves. So the main difference, like I said, between your normal symmetrical nocks is a G nock and a regular nock. There are different sizes, small and large groove, but G nocks are only available in large groove. One thing to consider, in my opinion, that is extremely important, that is a secret, that is not passed around very often, is you need to make sure that you are shooting the same nock out of the same cavity from each arrow to arrow. So what does that mean? And what do I mean by that? What I mean is when these Easton nocks are made inside of an injection mold, there are 4 cavities inside of that nock. So if anybody's ever put together a model, you get a parts tree that has, it's a piece of plastic and it has like all the parts held together by these little pins, and then you got to break them off and glue them together to make your model. That's exactly what nocks are when they're injection molded. The Easton nocks have 4 cavities, 4 different cavities. And what I have learned through the grapevine, I haven't done the testing myself because I don't have a Hooter shooter myself, is that the different cavities impact different. So if you were to take an arrow and you were to strip the vanes off and shoot it bare shaft out of a shooting machine on a compound, you'll find that the different cavities impact slightly different than the others. So in theory, if you had a half a dozen arrows fletched up with cavity 1 and a half a dozen arrows fletched up with cavity 2, they won't group as good as if you had them all fletched up with the same cavity. I believe, if I remember correctly, that the cavity 1 and cavity 3 are very similar, and cavity 2 and cavity 4 are very similar. But I'm not 100% on that. That's been a long time. So how can you, at home, find out which cavity the nocks come from? It's pretty simple. So let's look at all of these bags. I have all of them the same, and if you look at the barcode and the part number, even though these are all different colors and sizes and everything, if you look right here, dash 03, dash 03, dash 03, 03. What do you think that means? Let's look at this one, 02. 03 means which cavity it came from. Easton pays the people who produce their nocks to break them off of the parts tree and put them in the same bin, so then when they get packaged, they're all packaged together from the same cavity. Why do you think that is? Cavity number 3, and I have all of these nocks that are all cavity number 3 because that just happened to be the cavity that I was shooting at a given time when I was lucky enough to tell Easton, hey, I need some new pin nocks. Can you send me cavity 3 pin nocks? And they say, oh yeah, sure. And look at that. That's what I've got. And the reason is, like I just said, if I break a nock and I put a new nock on, how do I know that it's going to hit the same? Because I put it in with the same cavity. If I'm shooting on a target and everybody's got orange nocks and I want to be different and be able to see my arrows in the spotting scope, I'll throw some green ones on. I throw the same cavity on, I hit the same place, there's no issues. So this is extremely important and an extremely important detail that not many people know about, especially at the high levels. This does make a difference. So when you go and buy nocks at your local pro shop, ask them to give you the same cavity that you have. There's no way externally on the nock to know. Essentially what happens is those 4 cavities are exactly identical to each other. So that means the way they machine them is the same, but because the plastic flows in at different rates and different speeds, and then the knock cools down at different speeds in the different places, what that's doing is it's creating small internal structure differences from one knock to the other. And when that happens, you have a slight shift in the way the knocks actually behave due to the molecular structure of the knock itself, with slight changes in stress patterns and all sorts of stuff. So the knocks will flex slightly different from cavity to cavity, and that's why you have different impact points. Now, does that apply to any other knock manufacturer outside of Easton? And I will tell you that yes and no. I don't know all of the knocks out there. I know the 3 main differences: the Easton knocks, the gold tip knocks, and the biter knocks. Now, rumor has it that every biter knock is produced in a single cavity mold. Now, my question to that is, how often do they replace that single cavity? Because I know that injection molding, over time, the mold itself changes. So, and it breaks down, it wears out, they have to replace it, they have to fix it, they crack, it happens. So, my question is, how often do they have to replace that single cavity knock? Because they make a lot of knocks. You know, Easton makes a lot of knocks, and they have 4 cavities, so it should last 4 times as long in theory. But how do you know, in my opinion, you know, how did I know that this knock and this knock and this knock were all made within a relatively similar time period? So how is my impact going to change if they're not made in the same time period? So my fears of biter knocks, they shoot really great. A lot of top shooters use them, so I don't think that's much of an issue. But it is something to consider, and for me, you know, it made me a bit uncomfortable. So these are gold tip pin knocks. They're only available in large groove, which was great for me because I shot a 20 strand string. And they have an 8 cavity mold for their knocks. So if you look on the opposite side of the gold tip logo, there are a series of dots. See how that one has 2? And this one has 8. That one also has 8. So they're all going to have different amounts of dots. That one's got 5. So what do you think these dots mean? That means which cavity it came from. Cavity 8. Cavity 5. So what can you do with this knowledge? Cavity 4. What can you do with that knowledge? Honestly, I'm happy to report from what I have been told that Gold Tip was smart enough to manipulate and change their mold, their injection mold of the knocks, slightly different between those 8 cavities. So that way, when the knock got injected and cooled down and shrunk, they all shrunk to the exact same dimensions after the fact. Not before the fact, but after the fact. So that means that cavity 8, cavity 1, cavity 6, all of the cavities shoot the same because they manipulated and changed each individual cavity slightly, so each knock, when they were done and produced the same impact point. So the people that told me about this also told me about this. Another quick benefit of the gold tip pin knocks, in my opinion, if you look at the knock from the back and you look at the size differences and the overall diameter and the overall footprint of these 3 knocks, biter knock, Easton pin, gold tip pin, you can see that the biter knock is biggest vertical. Next is the Easton pin vertical, and then the biter vertical is much smaller. So you can really see it from this side, this view. Look how huge this is compared to this. And so what is that doing? What I have found is that when these knocks are a much smaller profile vertically, so when you have other arrows coming in to hit them, they don't break. I break almost no gold tip pin knocks compared to regular knocks. I would say that I break 75% less knocks when I use the gold tip pins versus the Easton pins, just because the size difference. I believe it's because as another arrow is coming in, the side of the bulge of the point is touching the shaft or touching the knock before the pin point does, and so it just pushes it out of the way and I don't break them. Plus it's a smaller surface area, so it's harder to hit anyway. But that's a little side benefit of the gold tip pin knocks that I did like. And we'll talk more about the benefits of gold tip pin knocks later. Now, the largest contributing factor to the differences in all of these knocks is going to be the difference of a regular knock and an asymmetrical knock. So symmetrical versus asymmetrical. So before we talk about which ones are symmetrical and asymmetrical, I'm going to draw you a diagram. This is a whiteboard. So what is symmetrical versus asymmetrical? Or what are the differences between a symmetrical knock and an asymmetrical knock? A symmetrical knock, if you're looking at it from the side profile, if this was the string, the groove of the knock would be perfectly vertical. That is a symmetrical knock. These are the ears that stick back, you know, behind the string. Now, if you were to shoot an asymmetrical knock, what would that look like? Well, an asymmetrical knock has the shape of the groove is not flat like this one. It is actually angled forward. Now, why would a knock be shaped like this versus this in the actual design of the throat of the knock? Well, this is very common and commonly used else in the knock world, but there is one brand of knocks that does this. And the reason that they do this is simply because of the way that we hold onto the string as finger shooters, or the way that we used to hold onto the string as finger shooters. The way that we used to hold onto the string as finger shooters with a split finger design, we would hold a lot more bottom finger curl and less top finger curl. And what that does is, you can see it angles the string forward while at full draw. You can actually check this out on an actual string and do this at home with me. If you have more bottom finger curl and less top finger curl, that string angles forward. So it would conform to that knock. Now, with the Coach Lee shooting style and some of the more modern methods, a lot more top finger is involved than bottom finger. And when you have this angle up, like I suggest in my form series, the string is now flat, so it would be better, in my opinion, for the symmetrical knock. So the biggest difference between all of these knocks can be summarized between a symmetrical versus an asymmetrical knock. So, which knocks are symmetrical and which knocks are asymmetrical? If you look, these are, the bottom knock is an Easton 3D Super Knock. The top knock here is a biter knock. If you look really close from the Easton knock, in that groove, it's flat. It's actually curved a little bit, but it's vertical, it's symmetrical. This biter knock, if you look at the groove in here, you can see that it has a flat spot in the bottom half, but then up in this top portion right there, it angles forward. So the actual shape of the biter asymmetrical knock is not actually quite like this. I was exaggerating. It is actually like this. So it has a flat spot and then an angled spot. The angled spot is always designed to be pointing towards the top. So if I take the biter knock, you'll see that from the side, the ears have a different shape. This would be the top, this would be the bottom. So you have to put them on consistently the same, because if you don't, you'll have different impact points, especially vertical variances in your impact point because of the shape of the knock. If you accidentally shoot them upside down, you're going to miss the target. This way, they will always be the same. So with this symmetrical versus asymmetrical, there are things to consider that are going to affect how the arrow tunes, how the arrow flies. Now, in my experience, when I have two setups, one with a regular knock, one with an asymmetrical knock, I have a different knocking point that is required to get the same bear shaft tune. The asymmetrical knock requires a much higher knocking point to compensate for that angle to maintain a good bear shaft tune. Now, some people that would be just fine, but for whatever reason, with my particular setup, I always needed a relatively high knocking point above center compared to other people. So when I shot the biter knock, it was so high that when my bow was at brace height, the arrow was angled down so much it looked like it was pointing at the stabilizer. And I said, you know, it's just a little bit extreme, so I'm going to shoot some regular knocks and try those again, because I shot biters for forever, and my scores actually went up a little bit. Don't know why, but that's just what I found in my experience, is the knocking point is related to asymmetrical versus symmetrical. Okay, so let's talk about the differences and what will happen between an in knock, a pin out knock, or an in out knock from biter. So here I have 3 of the 4 different types of biter nocks that are available for the Easton X10 arrow. The 4th one that I don't have here is an in-out nock. Okay, so what do they mean by in-out, pin-out, out, or whatever, is the difference in how they actually function. So this one is a pin nock, so it just simply presses onto a pin, as you can see, and this is a pin out nock. So a pin out nock goes on the pin and out of on the outside of the arrow. This is a out nock that only goes on the outside of the arrow. There's nothing that goes on the inside of the arrow. So there is an in out nock for the Easton X10 that both goes into the shaft as well as on the outside of the shaft. So how does the differences in the biter nocks affect the tune of the arrow? So keep in mind that pin nocks in general will stiffen the arrow because of the added weight of the pin in the back of the arrow. So in general, a pin nock will be stiffer than a out nock or a regular in nock because of that added weight. Another thing to consider with the biter nocks is this biter out nock actually makes the arrow longer a considerable amount on top of the fact that it weighs less than a pin nock. So you're going to not only make the arrow weaker because you no longer have weight of a pin, but also this back half of the arrow, from where the end of the shaft ends to where the groove of the nock is, the out nock is actually longer than the pin nocks. So that essentially lengthens the arrow, especially in the back half. That makes the arrow much weaker. This is a very popular nock to shoot at the highest levels of Olympic style recurve, because it takes what the X10 is already good at. And why it's good, because it's weak in the back half, more forgiving for finger shooters, and in my opinion it exaggerates that even more so, because this nock lengthens the back, makes it weaker, it shoots even better because it's more forgiving. However, the damages that can be done if you barely hit one of these nocks is it will destroy your X10. So it'll be completely garbage and you'll have to throw it out because it'll break the back half of the arrow. But again, like I said, this stiffens the back of the arrow up, so you lose a bit of performance there due to the forgiveness. However, when you try to fit these on the back of an X10, here's a brand new X10, unfletched. This is a 410, so it's a relatively big arrow. This is a biter out nock. Watch, it'll drop right on, and look how loose it is. I can pull the nock on and off super easy. It's not tight fitting. So you know what people do to make these fit better is they either take a piece of plastic and stick it between the shaft and the nock like this and push it on, or they use Teflon tape or something along those lines. Now what that does, in my opinion, I don't like that, because it's going to misalign your nocks slightly. If you have a little bit of plastic built up over here versus over here, what that's going to do is it's going to cock the nock sideways, and now you're no longer pushing the arrow straight, you're pushing the arrow a little bit askew. Whereas the pin nock is machined to go in the inside of the shaft, nice and snug, and then these get centered onto the shaft relatively perfectly. Now, what I do every single time I fletch and check my arrows is I will spin them and watch the nock rotate, and I'll make sure that the nock's not rotating in an oblong fashion, because then clearly the nock is not centered on the arrow correctly. So from an engineering standpoint, I don't like these because they don't fit. Again, this is a 410. This is a relatively stiff and thick X10. With the stiffnesses going up, also the diameter of the arrow goes up, so the nock fits a little tighter. If you had these on 700 spine arrows, like female spined arrows or youth spined arrows, this nock wouldn't even fit remotely snug at all, and it would just be miserable. So here's a good comparison now that I have an arrow fletched or set up. You can see that I have the end of the shaft lined up with the end of that shaft, and you can see how this nock is shorter than this nock. So this is your proof to show you that this is lengthened, makes the arrow a little bit weaker. Plus it's plastic back here. It has a bit of flex compared to this pin nock design. Now I want to talk a little bit about what I liked for an indoor nock. This is another gem that I like to share. Many people like to shoot the large arrows like a 2312, or this is a 2712, and you can see this is a regular super unibushing nock, or a 3D unibushing nock or whatever from Easton. It's very similar to a G pin nock or a G nock. As you can see, the ears are extremely long. Not a fan of these because of that. However, these are better than the other type of nocks. I think they're the super uni nocks, or the I forget the name of the other Easton Knox, but this has one click when you click it onto the string because there's only one detent. The other type of Easton Knox has 2 clicks. It goes click, click. There's 2 clicks, and what happens, in my opinion, is less accuracy. So most people use these. However, you can get biter Knox like this that fit into the unibushing, and they are ultimately the same overall length as these other ones, these 3D Super Knox, and you can see how that won't really affect the tune all that much. This might shoot a little bit more accurate because the ears aren't as long. It is asymmetrical, so keep that in mind. But what I have found that is the best indoor shooting knock, hands down, is this knock. It's an old knock that Biter makes, and they're specifically for an oddball sized arrow. And this is the part number at Lancaster. It's called a 19-2L is what I used. Now look at the difference between this knock and this knock. See how this makes it much longer? And it's plastic, not aluminum. So what do you think that's doing to the back half of the arrow? It's making it much weaker. I shot so much better indoors with these knocks compared to this knock. So in my opinion, if I was recommending anything, I'd go buy you some 19-2Ls, and they will shoot much better for you indoors if you're shooting this type of arrow with a unibushing. That's the way to go. So that's what I would do if I was you. So like I said, there's going to be another video where I'm going to do some more testing with some knocks and explain to you some more differences in knocks. As you can see, this is quite a complicated issue because there are so many different types. But I'm going to do my best to educate you and break down the differences of each type. This is kind of just a really grand overview, so you'll be able to see the differences of different types. We'll evolve this subject as time goes on, so please don't hesitate to comment below with some questions, some concerns, or some ideas, or whatever you want to hear about, because this isn't a commonly known subject. There's a lot of unknowns out there and a lot of things that people haven't tested or haven't really heard before.